Morning. Welcome to the Sunday morning service at Open Door Bible Church in West Ossipee. We are going to be in Mark chapter 5 today. The first story we're going to see is about a demon-possessed man. I'll read you the first 8 verses. Then they came to the other side of the sea, to the country of the Gadarenes. And when he had come out of the boat, immediately there met him out of the tombs a man with an unclean spirit, who had his dwelling among the tombs, and no one could bind him, not even with chains, because he had often been bound with shackles and chains, and the chains had been pulled apart by him, and the shackles broken in pieces. Neither could anyone tame him. And always, night and day, he was in the mountains and in the tombs, crying out and cutting himself with stones. When he saw Jesus from afar, he ran and worshipped him and cried out with a loud voice, "What have I to do with you, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? I implore you, by God, that you do not torment me." For he said to him, "Come out of the man, unclean spirit." All right. So first we're going to do a little geography. It says he came to the other side of the sea, to the Gadarenes. Jesus and his disciples arrived in a region largely populated by Gentiles. His ministry here is not to Jewish people. His ministry here is to Gentiles, specifically a Gentile that is demon-possessed. Verse 2, immediately they met him out of the tombs, a man with an unclean spirit. Now what follows is the most detailed description of a demon-possessed man we have in the Bible. It is the classic profile of what demon possession looks like. Now, to get the whole picture, we need not only Mark chapter 5, but we need Luke chapter 8, which also talks about the same individual. So in Luke chapter 8 and verse 27, we find out he had been demon-possessed for a long time. The man wore no clothes and lived like a subhuman or a wild animal. Also we get that of Luke chapter 8. The man lived among the decaying and the dead. This was contrary to Jewish law and human instinct. Our story tells us he was dwelling among the tombs. This person had supernatural strength. It says chains were pulled apart. The man was tormented and self-destructed. It tells us he was crying out and cutting himself with stones. And this man had uncontrollable behavior. It says, neither could anyone tame him. Verses 3 through 6 of our passage kind of describes the life that was lived by this man. In verse 7, he recognizes Jesus. He says to Jesus, "You are the Son of the Most High God." Now this is in response to Jesus commanding the spirit to come out of him. This was his attempt to resist the work of Jesus. As I mentioned to you last week, in Jesus' time, there was a superstition that if you knew the exact name of a spirit, you could have control over it. So he describes Jesus as Son of the Most High God, attempting to exercise power over Jesus and to keep Jesus from casting him out. Obviously, it didn't work. He goes on to say to him, "What have I to do with you?" And then he implores him that he does not torment me. Now, this is actually the demon speaking through this individual. It's not the individual speaking, it was the demon inside him. Now, we talk about demonic possession, but let's make sure we understand it. Demonic possession is when a demonic spirit resides inside a human body At a time, the demon will show its own personality through the host body. Demonic possession is a reality today, but we must guard against either ignoring the fact or overemphasizing the fact. So like everything else in the Bible, we've got to keep it in perspective. Demon begged Jesus, "Do not torment me." Now, this is scary. I got to get you inside how a demon thinks. For a demon to be cast out of a human body would be torment. Demons want to inhabit human bodies because a human body is a weapon that a demon can use in attacking God. Now, that's true because men are created in the image of God. So a demon wants to attack that image by debasing the man and making him grotesque, just as he had done to this man that we've been reading about. Now, in verses 9 through 13, we're going to see Jesus exercise authority over this evil spirit. So he addresses him in verse 9. Then he asked, "What is your name?" Now, Jesus is not looking for a name so he can exercise authority. Jesus has authority. He doesn't need the demon's name. He's asking him a question. And he answers saying, "My name is Legion, for we are many." So there's all these demons living inside. He didn't get the name of any individual demon. He got a group name. He got a name that would let him know there was multiple demons. Well, we are many. Also, he begged him earnestly that he would not send him out of the country. Now, a large herd of swine, if you don't speak swine, that means pigs, was feeding there near the mountains. So all the demons begged him, saying, "Send us to the swine, that we may enter them." And at once Jesus gave them permission. Then the unclean spirits went out and entered the swine. There were about 2,000 swine. And the herd ran violently down the steep place into the sea and drowned. That wasn't a good move on their part. Wasn't good for them. Wasn't good for the pigs. All right, so verse 9. Ask them, "What is your name?" From the story as a whole, keeping it in context, we see that Jesus is not playing into the ancient superstition about knowing the demon's name. In fact, Jesus showed that it was unnecessary for him to know the name of the demon. When they replied Legion, they really weren't saying a name, but simply trying to intimidate Jesus with a large number. Pretty hard to intimidate Jesus. The answer of Legion said, "There are a lot of us. We're organized. We're unified. We are ready to fight, and we are mighty. Not as mighty as our God." Verse 10. Also, he begged him earnestly that he would not send them out of the country. If you read the story in Luke, the way Luke records it is they asked him not to send them into the abyss. And that's another whole lesson. So, verse 12. "Send us to the swine that we may enter them." Now, there's a reason for this. The demons wanted to enter the swine because demons are bent on destruction. And they hate being idle, and they hate not having somebody to live in. By the way, they move into the swine. The swine run down the sea and drown. The pigs are dead. The spirits go someplace else. Spirits didn't drown. Spirits aren't physical. Spirits are spiritual. Therefore, they couldn't drown. So you get that in your head. Verse 13. And at once Jesus gave them permission. Instead of putting these unclean spirits completely out of commission, Jesus allowed this because the time of the total demonstration of his authority over demons had not yet come. It would happen at the cross. Colossians 2:15 tells us that at the cross, Jesus disarmed demons in their attacks on believers. He made a public spectacle of their defeat, and he triumphed over them in his work on the cross. As Jesus died and rose again, he defeated evil. Amen. All right, the herd ran violently down the steep place into the sea and drowned. Again, this shows you the destructive nature of demonic spirits. They were looking to ruin the life of something. If they couldn't ruin the man, they'd ruin a bunch of pigs. Now, this shows another reason why Jesus allowed the demons to enter the pigs, because he wanted everyone to understand the real intention of these demons. Their intention was to destroy, to inflict harm. They wanted to destroy the man, just as they destroyed the pigs. Because we are made in the image of God, they could not have their way as easily with the man, but their intention was just the same, to completely destroy him. Now, everybody's watching this. Let's see what the reaction of the crowd is. Verses 14 through 17. So those who fed the swine, and they told it in the city and in the country, and they went out to see what it was that had happened. Then they came to Jesus. They saw the one who had been demon-possessed and had the legion sitting, clothed, and in his right mind. Get the next words. And they were afraid. Now, when this guy's living in the tombs, when he's running around naked, when he's breaking the chains, they weren't as afraid. Now they see him there, healed, cured, no more demon, clothes on, in his right mind. It says they were afraid. They were afraid because they didn't understand what happened. People tend to be afraid of what they don't understand. And they could not understand what had just happened. And those who saw it told them how it happened to him who had been demon-possessed and about the swine. Then they began to plead with him, the him is Jesus, to depart from their region. Now, you would have thought they would be excited that this guy had been healed. They just want Jesus to get out of here. We don't understand what he did. We've lost a bunch of pigs. We don't know what's next. Why don't you just leave? Wrong approach. But Jesus is a gentleman. If you ask Jesus to leave, he will. Now, why were they afraid? Part of their fear was founded in the fact that their superstitions were shattered. According to what they believed, the demon should have won and Jesus should have lost. Didn't happen. Their perspective is now all messed up. Verse 16, those who saw it told how it happened. I'm sure the story of the swine was repeated over and over and over. Now, the impact on the pigs seemed to have been a greater concern than the impact on the man. Guy wasn't costing him any money. He was just a run-around crazy guy. We lost 2,000 pigs. That's 2,000 hams we don't have anymore. There's a money associated with that. It's always about the money. They didn't know what Jesus would do next, so they asked him to leave their area. And Jesus did. Now, that's the crowd's reaction. Let's look at the reaction of the guy who was delivered from the demons. Verses 18 through 20. And when he, that's Jesus, got into the boat, he who had been demon-possessed begged him that he might go with him. However, Jesus did not permit him. He said to him, go home to your friends and tell them what great things the Lord has done for you and how he has had compassion on you. And he departed and began to proclaim in Decapolis all that Jesus had done for him, and all marveled. Now, I read that, you took it at face value, and you missed the geography lesson that goes with it. So our first geography lesson was we were in a place that was mostly inhabited by Gentiles. It says he began to proclaim in the Decapolis. Decapolis was a term that said this is a group of 10 cities. So this guy wasn't just going to his town and proclaiming. He's going to 10 towns and proclaiming. This guy has now become an evangelist. He's now spending his days and nights telling folks about Jesus. Verse 18. So the demon-possessed guy wanted to be with Jesus. Now, Jesus healed him. He had respect for that. He wasn't sure he was going to stay healed without Jesus' presence. So he wanted to be right close to Jesus in case he had a relapse. He's not going to have a relapse. Jesus has sent the demon away, and he needs to have faith and trust that. Verse 19 says Jesus did not permit him. He knew that he had a more important ministry among his own communities, and community in this case was this group of 10 cities. This man could be a light among the people of these Gentile cities in a way that Jesus and his disciples could not. They're going to listen to this guy because he's one of their own. He's not an outsider. In New Hampshire, we have a term for those people who aren't from New Hampshire. You know the term? Flatlanders. That's a real term. It wasn't just a thing to put paper. One of the things I would have to do when I went to telephone company meetings way up north, because I was the guy from down south, I had to tell all those guys, first thing, I'm not a Flatlander. I was born here. I'm one of you. So this guy could make that kind of a statement. He's going to have a much bigger effect on these guys because he's one of them. He's going to be able to relate to them. There are people I deal with as a pastor that I can't relate to. I can't look them in the eye and say, I know what you're going through. Because I don't. I've never been there. One of those groups of people I can't relate to directly well are folks who have suffered from drug addiction. That's never been my problem. Thank you, Lord. But I can't sit down with a drug addict and say, I know what you're going through. I don't. I can connect them to somebody who knows what they're going through. But I can't tell them, hey, I understand what it is you're dealing with. Because I don't. I've never been there. I've never experienced that. So this guy had this way to build this bond with the people he is witnessing to. Jesus told him, tell him what great things the Lord has done for you. He sent him off to be an evangelist. And he did exactly what Jesus told him. He said he began to proclaim in the Decapolis. So he's off, going from city to city in this group of 10 towns, telling people what Jesus did for him. I suspect he planted a church. I suspect that he started to disciple people. But this guy was on fire. He had an encounter with Jesus, and it changed him for the rest of his life. By the way, that's how we ought to be. The fact that we've had an encounter with Jesus ought to change us for the rest of our life. All right. We're going to go back by boat. We're going to leave the Gentiles. We're going to go back to the Jewish side of the lake, verses 21 through 24. Now, when Jesus had crossed over again by boat to the other side, a great multitude gathered to him, and he was by the sea. And behold, one of the rulers of the synagogue came, Jairus by name. And when he saw him, he fell at his feet and begged him earnestly, saying, my little daughter lies at the point of death. Come and lay your hands on her, that she may be healed, and she will live. So Jesus went with him, and a great multitude followed him and thronged him. Remember, we've talked about the reason Jesus taught from a boat so often was because the crowd was just pressing in on him. Everybody wanted to touch him. Everybody wanted to be next to him. All right, verse 21. A great multitude gathered to him. Jesus left the Gentile region around the Sea of Galilee, and he returned to the Jewish towns on the other side. And immediately crowds came to Jesus. Now, they didn't come because they were spiritual folks who couldn't wait to hear the next spiritual truth Jesus was going to teach. Jesus was healing people. Jesus was feeding people. We're looking for free food and free medical attention. That's what they're looking for. One of the people who came, verse 22, was a ruler of the synagogue. Now, ruler of a synagogue would be something like a modern pastor. This individual managed both the spiritual and business affairs of the synagogue. This guy came in desperation. It says he fell at Jesus' feet and begged him earnestly because his daughter was at the point of death. Now, this guy had heard what Jesus could do. He's got a daughter that's sick and nobody can heal her. He's desperate. He's willing to try anything. So he comes to Jesus. He explains what he wants. Lay your hands on her, that she may be healed, and she will live. So this guy had great confidence in Jesus, and he believed that Jesus had all power to heal his daughter. But he also believed that Jesus should be there for it to happen. Said to Jesus, come and lay your hands on her. So he believed Jesus needed to be present. In Luke chapter 7, we read about the Roman Centurion with a sick servant. He came to Jesus, said, I understand you. I'm a man under authority. I tell people what to do and they do it. You don't have to come to my house. Just say the word and my servant will be healed. So he understood Jesus didn't need to be present. This guy is not at that point yet. He still thinks Jesus has to be there. Now, let's look at this guy. Ruler of the synagogue. Let's notice 4 things displayed by this guy that are necessary to have your prayers answered. All want our prayers answered, right? Yeah. Let's look at what this guy had. We must put ourselves in the presence of Jesus. This guy came to where Jesus was. We must humble ourselves sincerely before Jesus. He fell at the feet of Jesus. We must lay open our requests with a holy earnestness. He begged him earnestly. We must have total confidence in the power and the goodness of Jesus. He said to him, come and lay your hands on her, that she may be healed, and she will live. Verse 24 says, so Jesus went with him. Now, Jesus is a busy guy. He's got this whole crowd looking for his attention. He says, yep, I'm going with you. Jesus cared for and made time for this concerned father. Now, he's just told the guy he's going to go with him. He's getting ready to go with him. It's the next thing Jesus is going to do. Except something happens. Ever have good plans? You're all set to do something? Something happens. You get outside and the truck doesn't want to do what you want it to do. All right, verses 25 through 34. Now a certain woman had a flow of blood for 12 years and had suffered many things from many physicians. She had spent all that she had and was no better, but rather grew worse. When she heard about Jesus, she came behind him in the crowd and touched his garment. For she said, if only I may touch his clothes, I shall be made well. Immediately the fountain of her blood was dried up, and she felt in her body that she was healed of the affliction. And Jesus immediately, knowing in himself that power had gone out from him, turned around in the crowd and said, "Who touched my clothes?" But his disciples said to him, "You see the multitude thronging you, and you say, 'Who touched me?'" And he looked around to see her who had done this thing. But the woman, fearing and trembling, knowing what had happened to her, came and fell down before him and told him the whole truth. And he said to her, "Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace and be healed of your affliction." Now, let's go back and unpack the story. Verse 25 said she'd had a flow of blood for 12 years. This woman was in a desperate condition. Now, it isn't bad enough that she's got this flow of blood. Think of it as a 12-year-long period. She had this problem. It made her ceremonially unclean. This was a real burden for her to live under for 12 long years. Now, according to the Jewish idea of the time, if this woman touched anyone, she would make them ceremonially unclean. This uncleanliness did not allow them to take any part in any worship service. They couldn't go near the temple. They couldn't be with anybody. They couldn't touch anybody. How are you supposed to work for her marriage? Her marriage dissolved. By the very law of her people. Now, this is the law the Jewish religious folks made up, not God's commandments. By the very law of her people, she was divorced from her husband, could not live in her home, was ostracized from all society, and must not come into contact with her old friends. She was excommunicated from the synagogue, and she couldn't even go to the court of the women in the temple to pray. She was totally shut off from everything for 12 years. Do you understand how desperate this lady is? Now, she tried. She had suffered many things from many physicians. She went to the doctors to get better, but only became worse. And in the process of becoming worse, all her money was gone. Now, Luke, in chapter 8, remember Luke is a doctor, tells us that she has spent all her livelihood on physicians. Luke understood how doctors could drain you of your money. But nothing's changed, has it? All right. Now, what's this lady saying? Verse 28. "If only I may touch his clothes, I shall be made well." Now, remember, she's got this condition. She's not allowed to touch a person. So she's going to touch his clothes. She shouldn't even be in the crowd. I mean, it'd be like somebody who's got COVID with no mask on, going into the crowd and coughing every place. I mean, she didn't belong there. She couldn't be there. But she said, "I'm going to do this in secret. Nobody will know. I'm going to sneak up behind Jesus and just touch his robe." And she did that. Verse 29. Immediately, the fountain of her blood was dried up. Her problem ceased. She was cured. She was healed on the spot. Wow. Now, according to the way people thought in those days, if she touched Jesus, Jesus would become unclean. However, the way it really worked, if she touched Jesus, she became clean, and Jesus was fine. Now, she knew what happened. She felt it in her body. She knew immediately that something was different. She didn't feel the same. And then Jesus said, "Who touched my clothes?" Now her goal was to really touch Jesus, but she knew she couldn't, so she settled for touching his clothes. Now the disciples, those spiritual giants that followed Jesus, Lord, what are you saying? It's a crowd. Everybody's pushing and shoving. How can you ask who touched you? Jesus asked because he knew something had happened. Jesus felt the power leave him. By the way, there's no other story where somebody touches Jesus' clothes and is healed. This is a unique situation. Every other time it's Jesus touching them or Jesus speaking to them. This lady had mustered up the faith to go and get healed. The disciples didn't understand the difference between casual contact with Jesus and reaching out to touch him in faith. Nothing has changed today. There are tons of people who know about Jesus who don't know Jesus personally. By the way, those folks go to church. They memorize Bible verses. They hold jobs in churches. They think they're okay. They don't understand the difference in knowing about Jesus and knowing Jesus. That difference is where you spend eternity. It's a big deal. Verse 32. And he looked around to see who had done this thing. He's God. He knows who's done this thing. But he wants to bring attention to this lady in a situation. This was for the woman's benefit, not Jesus. But the woman, fearing and trembling, knowing what had happened to her, came and fell down before him and told him the whole truth. Jesus made her go through all this so that she would have the assurance that she was healed. Now, in our own human nature, we come to God. We pray for something. We pray earnestly. And God does it. And we yell, Amen. And we get excited. A week later, we start to think, what if? What if this doesn't last? What if this comes back? What if this wasn't real and I just imagined it? So Jesus had to go through this experience publicly and told her she was healed. So the devil could never come in and plague her with the what ifs. Now, not only that, but Jesus is doing this to strengthen the faith of Jairus. The guy who was on his way to get his daughter healed. He thought it was all set. He thought it was good. He's on his way. Except something happened. Now, he asked this gal to do something embarrassing. Jesus may ask us to do things today that seem embarrassing to us. He doesn't ask us to do them because he wants to embarrass us. There's a higher purpose in what Jesus tells us to do. But listen, if avoiding embarrassment is the most important thing in our life, Jesus is not our God. Pride is our God. Because we are more in love with ourselves and with our self-image than we are in love with Jesus. Now, if you find yourself in the supermarket, God's tapping you on the shoulder, talk to that lady in the line behind you, and you're worried about being embarrassed, you got the wrong priority. You're not connected to Jesus like you should be. Now, by the way, this whole time Jesus is healing this lady. What's going through Jairus' mind? Hurry up and get this over with. My daughter is dying. We got to get to my daughter. You told me you were coming, and you stopped to deal with this lady. Tell her to come back later. I mean, you suppose Jairus is getting a little hot under the collar? All right. Verse 35. While he was still speaking, some came from the ruler of the synagogue's house and said, your daughter is dead. Why trouble the teacher any further? As soon as Jesus heard the word that was spoken, he said to the ruler of the synagogue, "Do not be afraid, only believe." I want that "only to believe" to stick in your head. They tell him his daughter's dead. I mean, his heart sank. He's brokenhearted. He's a dad that just lost his daughter. She was 12 years old. She was the joy of his life. And she's gone. Now, I'm not a numbers person. I don't make a big deal out of numbers in the Bible. But notice the woman suffered for 12 years. And for 12 years, Jairus had the joy of his daughter, who is now dead. Just bringing it to your attention. Jesus tells him, don't be afraid. Only believe. Told him to do two things. Stop being afraid. Now that sounds almost cruel for Jesus to say. But Jesus knew a spiritual principle that applied right at this moment. Fear and faith can never go together. Let me do that again. Fear and faith can never go together. We got to deal with the fear so that we can have the faith that we need. Before Jairus could really trust Jesus, he had to decide to put away fear. Second, Jesus told Jairus to only believe. Don't try to believe and be afraid at the same time. Don't try to believe and figure it all out. Don't try to believe and make sense out of what's going on. Only believe. Jesus needed Jairus to believe his words. Everything told Jairus the situation was hopeless. But the word of Jesus brought hope. Terry, are you ready back there to stop me when I tell you? Can you do it or have I got to do it? I'll tell you in a second. I can do it. All right, so, what I want to do is I want to get this only believe stuck in your head. Do you ever hear a crazy commercial jingle on the radio or the TV that you could never get out of your head after you heard it? I'm going to try to do that to you this morning on purpose. I want you to leave here with only believe ringing in your head. Pastor Terry, just go with me. We're going to sing together right in the middle of a message. Who ever heard of such a thing? I'm ready. I'll tell you who Paul Ryder was later. Hope you can read the words, because we're going to sing in just a second. You sing with me. Are we ready? Only believe, only believe, all things are possible. Only believe. I don't hear you. Only believe, only believe, all things are possible. Only believe. We will do that again at the end of the service. But I want that to be stuck in your head for the rest of your life. Whenever there's a problem, whenever there's something you can't figure out, whenever you are crying out to Jesus for help, I want those words, only believe, to come back to you. The guy who wrote the song was one of the early pastors of the Moody Church in Chicago. First time I was ever exposed to this song, I was in a pastor's meeting in Indiana. The guy speaking was an evangelist from Texas, gravelly voice, old-time Texan. And right smack dab in the middle of the message, he starts singing the song, and about 2/3 of the people in the audience knew the song and just went with it. It was just an amazing thing that I've never forgotten. So I hope it will have that kind of an effect on you, that you remember that we need to only believe. Well, let's look at what happens with Jairus and his daughter. I'll do verses 37 through 43. And he permitted no one to follow him except Peter, James, and John, the brother of James. Then he came to the house of the ruler of the synagogue and saw a tumult, and those who wept and wailed loudly. When he came in, he said to them, "Why make this commotion and weep? The child is not dead, but sleeping." And they ridiculed him. But when he had put them all outside, he took the father and the mother of the child and those who were with him and entered where the child was lying. And he took the child by the hand and said to her, "Talitha cumi," which is translated, "Little girl, I say to you, arise." Immediately the little girl arose and walked, for she was 12 years of age, and they were overcome with great amazement. But he commanded them straitly that no one should know it, and said that something should be given her to eat. That's Jesus. He's always concerned about people. Here's this little 12-year-old girl. She's been dead. She's been raised back to life, and she's hungry. Jesus says, "Peter." Jesus is always looking out for the details in our life, isn't he? He knows everything we need. All right, let's go back and unpack my story. Verse 37. He permitted no one to follow him except Peter, James, and John. These are often considered the inner circle of Jesus. Now, I chuckled. My commentary said, perhaps Jesus took these three guys with him because he didn't want to leave them on their own. They'd get in trouble. What's the charge for that? Verse 38. A tumult, and those who wept and wailed loudly. In those days, it was the custom to hire professional mourners to add to the atmosphere of grief and pain at a funeral. The more mourning, the better. But the professional mourners only grieved on the outside. Now, I tell you this, I want to give you some background. Even the poorest person was expected to hire a minimum of 2 flute players and 1 professional mourner when someone in the family died. If you were an important person, like the ruler of the synagogue. By the way, if you were the ruler of the synagogue, that was a high-paying position. You had money. So there would have been a great number of mourners and wailers. Jesus very quickly assesses the situation. The child is not dead, but sleeping. Now, everybody in the crowd is having a problem with this. Jesus was not out of touch with reality. He said this because he knew a higher reality, a spiritual reality that was more certain and more powerful than death itself. It says they ridiculed him. Now we read that and we say, gee, what a shame that is. But you don't get the significance of the word in English. I am not a Greek scholar. What I'm about to tell you came out of a book. But the word for they ridiculed him in Greek is in the imperfect tense. What it would have meant was not that they ridiculed him, but that they consistently, constantly kept going. This wasn't one time. This was just an ongoing thing. He put them all outside. Jesus would have nothing to do with people who don't believe his promise. He put them out so they would not discourage the faith of Jairus. What did Jairus need to do? Only believe. Little girl, I say to you, arise. Jesus spoke to a dead girl as if she were alive. And he could do that because Jesus is God. Romans 4:17 says that God gives life to the dead and calls those things which do not exist as though they did. Remember, Jesus spoke the world into existence. So Jesus spoke to this girl with the power of God, and she was raised from the dead. They were overcome. I bet they were. With great amazement. Jesus didn't fail Jairus. He took care of his need. He didn't fail the woman who needed to be healed. But in ministering to both, he needed to stretch the faith of Jairus extra far. He needed to help him to only believe. In all this, we see how the work of Jesus is different, yet the same among each individual. If Jesus can touch each need so personally, he can touch your need and my need today. Now, look at some of the things we saw from the story. Jairus had 12 years of enjoyment with this little girl that he felt was about to be extinguished. The woman had 12 years of agony that seemed hopeless. God's timing is always perfect. God's timing is really our timing. Honest. God knows what's best. God knows when it's the right time. By the way, 10 years ago, the first time I stood on that porch, looked at the mountain across the street, and asked God to give us a Christian radio station, it wasn't God's time. We weren't ready. But in time, God answered it. Jesus was an important man, the ruler of the synagogue. The woman was basically a nobody. It doesn't even tell us her name. But Jesus knew them both, and they were both important to him. Jesus knows every one of us, and we are important to him. Jairus was wealthy and important. The woman was poor. If she'd had money, she spent it all on doctors. Jesus didn't care about their financial status. He loved them and ministered to them. Jairus came publicly. The woman came secretly. Jesus doesn't care how we come. He just wants us to come. Jairus thought that Jesus had to do a lot to heal his daughter. The woman thought all she needed to do was to touch Jesus' garment. But they both had faith. They both believed. And God honored that belief. Jairus' daughter was healed secretly. The woman was healed publicly. It doesn't matter how Jesus ministers to us. He will meet our need. Sometimes he meets it publicly. Sometimes he meets it privately. He always meets it on his terms, in his time. And it's always what's best for us. Pastor Terry, can we have the song one more time? Sing with me this time. I want you to get this locked into your brain. Nice and loud like you believe it. Here we go. Only believe, only believe, all things are possible. Only believe, only believe, only believe, all things are possible. Only believe. I hope the song will be stuck in your brain forever. Not my singing it, that'll ruin it. But I hope the message of only believe is stuck in your mind. For those of you who've been watching us on the internet today, thank you for joining us. Come and be with us in person at Open Door Bible Church, West Ossipee, right next to McDonald's and the post office. God bless you and have a great day.